So my name is Ashley Fox. I am a registered practical nurse and I am the Ontario Liberal candidate for Perth-Wellington. Currently, election day is on February 27th, and there'll be more information coming on February 14th for polling locations for that. And you can vote today at the returning office or our local elections office on Erie Street in Stratford, or you can request a mail-in ballot. And now electionsontario.ca has their full information, and they'll be having more information on advanced polling for February 20th to the 22nd, as well as where those polls will be.
I'm Colin Burrows, and this is the Woodstein Media Podcast, Season 2, Episode 1. This podcast is produced on the lands of the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation, Anishinaabe, and Odawa peoples. This winter has been a mess, with hazardous weather and political threats to Canada from the United States. In the wake of this unprecedented behavior from the United States, Doug Ford's Progressive Conservative government has called a snap election. Whether it was called to get ahead of potential Greenbelt charges, or if the timing has to do with Trudeau's resignation and a looming federal election, or if it hinges on wanting a strong mandate of support from Ontarians as Ford attempts to look like a strong man standing up to Trump. Doesn't matter. Whatever reason, it's happening, and it's happening fast. This election will be over by the end of the day on February 27th. Here in Canada, we can wrap up our elections toot sweet, which is another of the many reasons why Trump can go fuck himself. We don't want to be part of the endless horror that is the American-style campaign cycle. It just drags on and on and on. So even though I'm taking time to continue my education right now, I am back at it with this podcast and hope to kick off Season 2 speaking to as many of my local candidates as possible before the election. I reside in the Perth-Wellington riding, but I encourage all Ontarians to visit ontarioelections.ca and find out where and when to vote in your riding. On this episode, I am speaking with Liberal candidate Ashley Fox. We speak about education, healthcare, how the American threat of tariffs will have an effect at all levels of government, harm reduction, transportation in rural communities, and more. This podcast and Woodstein Media are independently produced journalism. You can support them through Patreon or by donating through PayPal at Woodstein.ca. That's WOOD-STEIN.ca. Thanks for your interest and support. If you enjoy this podcast, you can support it by listening to more episodes and liking, sharing, subscribing, or reviewing them. This is helpful and appreciated. Thanks. So I've qualified that I have a little more leeway maybe doing this myself. So now I want to get into some of the issues, and I've just got a list here, and I'm thinking with the way I'm doing this, I'm able to be more of, instead of a journalist, exactly, I'm more of a constituent, because that's what I am, that you've got to win over. So we're going to start with something I know you care about a lot. There's a few things in here, but healthcare right now is, and I know you work in healthcare, so that also gives you a different viewpoint maybe than some other people that are running. Okay, let's start by talking about hospital closures and what you'd do, your party, or just say you got in yourself. What ideas do you have that would help alleviate some of those problems that we're running into now, where hospitals are actually closing and haven't done that for I don't know how many years.
It was unheard of. Honestly,
Yeah.
the hospital ER closures, there was one documented in, I think it was between 2015, 2016. There's only one documented as an ER closure. So that just shows you the significance of it, especially nowadays when it's so, I hate to use the word common, but it's become almost so common that people are not keeping it top of mind anymore. It's just kind of, oh, it's another closure. In Perth-Wellington, I mean, we've got the neighboring ridings around us here on Bruce, Greybury Sound. They've had significant closures and also significant issues where they're losing their funded beds, right? We've got Durham, Ontario, where the beds have transferred to other sites. You mentioned before, I mean, I work in healthcare, and that is where I can see some of the changes, especially in home care, where I predominantly work, home care, long-term care, and retirement. But I also have a unique view in the sense that I'm also a patient of the system, navigating myself maternal care in 2022 and seeing the closures that were actually impacted in our area that I actually had no idea about until I was firsthand in the system. Noticing specialized services. My daughter, when she was 6 days old, we got transferred to London Hospital, and thankfully our local hospital was ER was open, and our physician advocated tremendously. I'm still in debt, honestly. 2.5 years later, significantly advocated for us to be able to access what she needed. But then we also have the family doctor shortages, right? And that's something we've heard right across the riding. I'm fortunate that I have a family doctor, but I can see the stress, and I can see what he's trying to navigate along with other members of his team. What I would do in regards to the hospital closures is we need to draw attention to it. It is in the media, but I don't think it's getting a significant amount of attention that it properly deserves. And I don't know necessarily that the public is truly aware of what's happening until they either need care themselves or something catastrophic happens. I draw to Lake Clinton, Ontario, where there was a stabbing, and they didn't realize the ER was closed until they arrived seeking patient care. And that's just very concerning. There's a lot of little things we can do in healthcare, like modernizing it. I mean, we're still using fax machines. There's still a lot of issues with emails and things like that, and that impacts my day-to-day work as well. There's a lot of work being done on e-health. We could really progress that a lot faster, especially between hospitals and specialties. And then it's bringing back the family doctors. I mean, I don't want to say a significant population seeking ER care, but if you can't get access to a family doctor, or you can't get in to see your family doctor, or you're penalized for accessing urgent care, there's a significant population that is impacted.
Okay. So in that with family doctors, we both live fairly rurally. What can you do at the provincial level to entice family doctors to want to go to the smaller areas? Is there anything you can do that way?
There's quite a bit of work being done, I think, at the provincial level of medical schools and even just opening up those spots. But what we really need to do is make primary care an attractive career choice. I think back to myself when I graduated from nursing, I didn't know where I wanted to practice. That was just, you graduate and you're looking at all these different options. And I remember the new graduate initiative it's a fairly successful program for nurses. You apply as a graduate, you're guaranteed work, and then hopefully you can transition to work with that organization after. And I remember applying because there was so many applications in that portal locally, but those positions were not available. So I didn't have that opportunity to practice. So with the modernization, eliminating some of this paperwork and just really making primary care attractive again, but also that team base, having the support of nurses, nurse practitioners, and our allied health, we really can make a difference. There's a lot of potential in our system. And I think people, because we hear so many negative stories, we don't see the potential that we truly have and how lucky we are. We just need to make it so that it's accessible again, and make it so that we're supporting our workers to provide that best care.
And in supporting our workers, healthcare is one of many career paths that used to be, like especially a doctor, used to be rewarded very well monetarily. And, if you became a doctor, it was highly attractive for someone. And that's changed. Like, for all the stress you get with that job, a lot of the nursing and nurse practitioners, all of them, it doesn't seem like they're being rewarded fairly. What would you push for in the government that way?
There's been a lot of controversial bills that have come forward, especially under the Ford government, some of them impacting healthcare workers and some of them including public service workers right across the board, right? It's generally female predominant fields that are impacted. our educators, healthcare, and public servants. And so one of the things that I really strive for in this election, and I've been talking to people at the door, is, we can listen, but are we actually providing action based on the recommendations and the feedback that we're receiving? Because it's one thing to receive that listening and hear what we need to do, but if we don't act on them, it's a little bit more difficult. So I think back to, there's a lot of disrespect, I think, to the taxpayer funds, especially right now calling this election 189 million. We spent 3.6 billion, I think, to send ourselves $200 rebate checks. A lot of this, like, we can talk about wages and stable employment and things of that nature, but the reality is we've been very wasteful in Ontario, and that money can be put towards better initiatives to support.
Hmm. Speaking of waste, the government we have in there right now is one of, or it's the most expensive government we've had in there so far. And
One of the
they,
largest caucuses as well. Yeah.
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 So, and then in this, I think it relates to healthcare, because they made the announcement about closing safe consumption sites
Hmm.
and they're going to open heart hubs, but those will be limited in their scope, and drug poisonings and that sort of thing. We're not, just because we're living rurally, we're not removed from that. And I know people when I was working at the Banner, people I interview got to know, they've passed away now through
Sorry.
yeah. And they were not just, disposable people. I don't know what they were good people. We need people out here who will take action on those things. Where do you stand on like harm reduction techniques, and would you get in there and push to maybe even stop some of those closures if you were in a position to do that?
The interesting thing, and been following along, because obviously that's a very interesting enough topic, especially when I work in Kitchener-Waterloo, and I know Kitchener-Waterloo was a significant area that was surprised by some of those announcements that came forward.
Hmm.
We definitely have our challenges and barriers, especially being in a rural community. Access some of those services, we have to bring it to them here in our population. It's not good enough to expect someone to find their way to some of those urban centers. In terms of what we would do as a party, we've already said that we would not be having any cuts or anything, and that those systems would be open. We need to have resources for people to access, and I do support a Heart Hub model having access to housing and accessing to services and things of that nature. Like that is a really good benefit.
Hmm.
Um, the downside is obviously the harm reduction and not being able to access those services. Should they be near close to a daycare or school? No. But should they be accessible to the person who actually needs them? Absolutely. One of the things that absolutely was concerning to me is that when those Heart Hub models were announced, there wasn't a transition period when Minister Jones had made those announcements, and there was about a month's, I think, a month delay in between accessing to apply for those hubs. So what
Hmm.
happens to those people during that month? I think as a government, we have to advocate for our population, but we also have to be mindful that, when we eliminate services or when we're transitioning services, people have the potential to fall through those cracks, and we can't let that happen. We need to have something that is streamlined, and we just need to make sure that it is accessible for our people.
Hmm. So in that, I heard you say, and I agree, probably shouldn't be close to like preschools. But so would you be in favor of some sort of effort to, instead of closing them, because people do need to access things safely, moving them, looking for locations that are more suitable to the needs of the people who are accessing those and safe for family environments?
Exactly. I think there's only less than five, I think, that were actually truly impacted. So for the government to make an entire changeover of that policy again, when we talk about efficiency of taxpayer funds, did we have to revise all of it, or was it necessary that, those five really just needed someone to advocate, have a conversation at, the ground level and say, okay, what can we do better? Adding in the housing resources and some of the social services, fantastic idea. I do support that
Mhm.
in addition to what we have. But
Uh,
I think it's kind of silly to change an entire policy, especially one where the previous Minister of Health actually advocated and opened many of those locations during their time. It just seems like a disrespectful to the taxpayer funds again.
Education, I don't even know where to start there, what level, because I'm back in college and I know we had a scare, all of us, because the Ontario government is funding the funding model they have right now relies too heavily on international students. And then, and we're trying to move away from that because that's been affecting housing in certain areas. But at the college level, would you and the Liberal government, would you look for a way that might be more based within where domestic sources of funding are more prevalent instead of trying to pull from the outside because that doesn't seem to be working and we've run into some huge issues right now. So,
Hmm. Yeah, yeah. So I not a, I shouldn't say not a student. I'm always a student for life. I'm joining lots of courses and things like that, but also an instructor. So I'm mindful of seeing both sides kind of in the situation. Part of I think one of the issues we've been looking at is you mentioned it with housing. There's also the job market. There's been a significant change into what education programs are being offered in terms of like coverage and things. Like I know when we think of like the personal support worker program, there's been a lot of initiatives done into it for funding for international nurses and others that want to join into those programs. We definitely do need to look at how we can access that for our population in general, because I think that that's another issue is that some students can't even access jobs, some students can't even access courses, just because of various methods in accessing. The other thing that failed to mention is we don't really have a seat for those educators at the table, right? To have those conversations of what they need. I mean, I don't want to pretend to be an expert in education, but I want to encourage them to have that seat at the table and tell us what they need, students and teachers. And I think one of the key components is that any legislation in regards to education right now has been sped through, right? It's less than 60 days. Typically, that's our time for stakeholder feedback. So I don't feel like we're making any informed decisions without having that voice. Mhm.
and then at the elementary and secondary levels of education, it just seems like things are underfunded, things are not getting the attention they need. And even throughout this, and it also happens in healthcare, I see announcements by the government saying, we've invested in this or we've invested in that, but you don't really see the results, the positive results of their investments. So, can you talk about what you'd be pushing for as part of the Liberal Party or what you would fight for if you just got in there and you had to be opposition to another PC party?
Like education is a big component. My nephew is going to school. He's in junior kindergarten in a neighboring riding to us. And in junior kindergarten, he entered a class of 32 students. And as you can imagine, junior kindergarten is one of the most exciting times. It's your first interaction into education. It's your first interaction to meeting some of your lifelong friends, as well as that sets you up for success for your future classes and talking to the educators, the ECEs about what they need. I feel again, it kind of goes back to our central theme of they're being listened to, but are they actually being heard? I think is part of the factor. A lot of the rural communities, especially in our area, are significantly growing as people are moving out of the urban centers. We're going to need more staff, especially if we're going to meet those smaller classroom sizes, and we're going to need more schools. There's just going to be more children that are going to need access to those things. Then we talk about as well as being respectful of tax dollars. There was the EQ testing. I know it can be controversial based on educators and families, but it was a part-time role that someone was an advisor, and under this government, it was a significant. I think they raised it to 350,000 as a paid position. So again, if we're truly focused on our children who are going to be our future, we need to focus on them. The education has to be funded so that we can support those kids, and we just need to keep looking at growth because they are our future.
Maybe even this is part where I'm going to be fair to the government right now. Funding of education has changed from when I was young because when I was young, we didn't have so many assistants, educational assistants. And like I have a son that's working in that in Waterloo region, and it's very good. And I'm not knocking it at all. I think we need more. They're stressed out. But where funding has gone and where we focus has really had to change over the years as we've noticed because I'm in an addictions and mental health program. I was doing a reading for class yesterday, and it was talking about how it's not believed that there's more people with mental health problems than there was years ago, but we're diagnosing more, we're finding more because we're becoming more aware of these issues and we're focusing on them more than we would have years ago. So we're noticing all this, and we have then the need for more assistance for kids to deal with problems that were always there. We just kind of tough it out, walk it off, or whatever before, but we're actually focusing on them now, which is a good thing. In that, do you agree or do you see how the focus of funding is adapting because of the way things are, especially concerning things like mental health of students?
I mean, it needs to be equitable, and you kind of hit it on the nail on the head there of like it's very individualized. Some students are going to need very different supports from other students. And I think that as we've gone through, diagnosing and being aware and having those conversations, we're starting to see what services students need and what would be a benefit. And I think part of what the government can do a little differently, you're right, they have invested, but are they investing into the right spots and what we need specifically for those students? And again, some conditions or some challenges, especially being in a rural area, is going to be significantly different than other parts of our riding. We think back even to factors that are outside of the education system, right? We know that there's a high population of children that are accessing the food bank. We know there's a high population of children that need access to transportation. We've also had a significant amount of youth that have reached out to me by email about concerns with employment for them, being able to meet their extracurricular activities and things like that outside of school. And even some of them being able to participate in some of the school events that they want to participate in. But the other thing too that again, it's a very, very consistent theme is that active listening and hearing. We've also had a youth reach out to me with concerns about programs that are being significantly underfunded or that dollars are not going to specific programs that children and youth need to succeed. And I think part of the role of the NPP is to advocate, obviously to listen, but also to have that voice at the table and amplify it so that people are truly aware of what's happening. I was aware of some of the cuts in the system. I was aware from some of my colleagues that work in education, but I wasn't aware of some of the programs that are impacted. And those youth need them to succeed in the post-secondary education. So if it's not being offered or if it's being cut, we're not setting them up for success either.
And then there is some areas that are just like you said, they're underfunded. Like parents of children with autism it's been years now, they've been fighting to get proper funding for
Yep.
programs. And how do you see your party and yourself advocating there?
It's so concerning that the wait list has blown up from 20,000 to 70,000, and it's only been a few years. I think a lot of the issues is that they've put forward a lot of great recommendations because my understanding is that the program itself was great. It was just underfunded.
Okay.
So when we look at what we can prioritize and actually work on so that we can help those families, it's again a consistent theme is they weren't being heard. I went to many rallies and protests that we were talking about, obviously healthcare and education, but there was quite a few families that did educate me on what was happening with the autism programs. And again, they've reached out to their MPPs and they haven't heard anything, or they've received an answer that's thanks for reaching out. Like we're supposed to be their voice. If I am successfully the MPP, that is something that we're going to work on. The Ontario Liberal Party has said that we will reverse the cuts because I feel like there's been a lot of changes to that program significantly, and they're not seeing a difference. We need to address that wait list. Like it cannot increase of 50,000. Like that those kids are our Ontarian kids. Like we need to adapt to this.
Yeah.
We need to set them up for success.
I'm gonna do another switch and talk about, because it's a strange time right now with, I don't even like saying his name, but south of the border,
Oh.
threats to of a trade war and things that will directly affect business in Perth County, like especially agriculture's huge and it could really be affected if tariffs end up going through. And how are you and your party, how will you do your part for the people of Perth-Wellington in standing up to a bully like Trump?
There is no shortage of news on that feed, has there? I feel like it's been a
No.
very busy week.
Yeah.
Well, the first part is we do have a plan that was released on OntarioLiberal.ca, which does address what we would do for all of Ontario, right? For the potential of tariffs and what we would be dealing with our U.S. colleagues. But in terms of Perth Wellington, I mean, there's two things that we need to do. One is we got to get the basics right. We can't expect Perth Wellington to succeed or do well, if there was an upcoming trade negotiations with the states. If we, don't have access to medical care, we don't have access to supporting our small businesses so that they can grow, thrive, and have employment. I know there's been a lot of questionable conversation about Ontario as a whole, but even in Perth Wellington, we have several large organizations that employ thousands that are Canadian and American, and they are going to feel that impact. We've even seen in an area close to you, there's been layoffs, 10 layoffs actually in the last week, and probably more coming. So it's about protecting jobs, but at the same time, this election was supposed to be called over a Protect Ontario mandate, right? Is what the
Yeah.
Ford government is saying. And they've never arranged any meetings with President Trump. They haven't even had that conversation. So when we look at the money that we are spending on this election, on the rebates, and all of those things that are supposed to be affiliated with Protect Ontario, and then we look at the legacy of the Ford government and what this means for jobs. My husband is an auto worker.
Mhm.
And so this conversation comes up significantly in our household because we know what's at risk and we know what's going to be coming in the conversation and in the upcoming days, weeks, and months. But one of the things that the Ford government did was cut his sick days. So, we need an advocate. We need someone who's strong, who can have those conversations. But the Ford government has not shown me that they have the legacy to do that. There's a lot of wish-washy policies, which you can't have with negotiating with a bully. And there's a lot of legacy that shows he hasn't cared for Ontarians. How can you protect Ontario if you can't show that?
Speaking of the wish-washy side, there's been times when he said something like, "We'll shut off the power to them," or whatever, and it
Mm,
sounds really hard and good, and like you're standing up. But then when it comes to actually adapting and changing some contracts with some American suppliers to and getting supplies from within Ontario or within Canada, he kind of flip-flops on that. So
true.
it's like he when he sounds good, he can really like, I'm being tough, and then he flip-flops right
It
after it.
sounds great in the moment, but then again, even in the past, it's hard to believe we're only on day 12 of the election, but even since the writ's been dropped, I mean, him saying that we were going to stop the Starlink
Yeah,
contract,
that's what.
and it's back on the table.
Yeah.
It didn't leave. So, part of the Ontario Liberal Party's platform and presentation includes like looking at those procurement processes and obviously prioritizing Canadian businesses, Canadian support. But one of the things that we also want to leverage is interprofessional or inter provincial. We have a
Yeah.
lot of great contracts here. I think even before Starlink was picked, there was other Canadian providers that were part of that procurement process. And it's interesting that in the selection basis, how they weren't chosen. So we have a
Mm-hmm.
lot of potential, and I think that's actually even the Buy Canadian movement that we've seen, and even the camaraderie that we're seeing across the province and across Canada right now. It's fantastic. We really need more of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I mean, we're linked internationally, globally. It's a very global world. And even there's some things where it will be very hard to just break ties. But a more personal point from my side, because some of my writing that I sell, I get published in the US. So I know what those sorts of partnerships are like and how it's not something that our our countries are so interlinked. We're not going to be able to just cut it all out at once. And there's some things that we're probably going to have to maintain in some ways because we produce certain things that they want, they produce certain things that we need. So, how do you see this might be a more federal, but I'm sure there'll be input from the provinces. How do you see maintaining some sort of respect that way for certain things while this bigger trade war or while, while the bigger mess is happening? I don't know what to call it, really. It's
No,
just,
that's fair. I wonder. I mean, there's two things we're known for, right? We do as Canadians have different similar values, but different values. So I think back to, the LA fire.
mhm,
All of this tariff talk was happening, some really mean things were said back and forth, but we still went and supported our neighbor.
yeah,
You can have those discussions, but at the end of the day, we're still going to support them and they're going to support us. And I see that camaraderie online. I'm very active as a social media user. And we see that, there's a lot of Americans that are even supporting the buy Canadian products movement. Like they want to show support. I think, as you mentioned before, there's always going to be, it's kind of like a family. There's always going to be those topics that we're going to have debate and discussion over.
yeah.
Sometimes heated, sometimes not. But at the end of the day, we're still interconnected. We still rely on each other heavily through our networks, and we have to be there to support each other. And I think that theme was really, really well construed across. It actually has been talked about, I think, at all levels, right? Municipal, provincial, federal. Obviously, federal will have the biggest role in terms of talking about, what our trade agreements look like and what that looks like in the future. But you're right. I think the province does have a say in it, and even amplifying our municipal and our riding voices of what we want to see and what needs to happen. We don't necessarily have to get into a significant disagreement, but we're also in an era of misinformation and disinformation. And I think we have a role to play in what that education looks like. I think back to there was a lot of controversy discussions about trade subsidies and from a lot of American users not understanding that we actually have a trade agreement and this is what it looks like. So we do have a little bit of work to do there on the provincial level, of course. We have a lot of work to do.
And we'll start getting into protecting farmland,
Hmm.
roads, and infrastructure and climate change. We'll try and have a conversation that goes into because all those end up being connected here. And we're not
We do.
Highway 413.
Well, we're really
Uh,
close to Wilmot too, right? We're
yeah.
Perth-Wellington actually is on the border of Wilmot, which I think has been a very amplified topic.
Okay. I'm not exactly sure I'm familiar with what's going on there, so
Oh,
I'm
fair
going to
enough.
let you to
Yeah,
talk about that first, and then
sure.
we'll.
So there's definitely been a lot of conversation, especially related to protected land and farmland. Obviously, the balance is having those conversations when we know that we're in a bit of a housing crisis, and the balance of building but not giving up. We have some of the most productive farmland in Canada. So it's been definitely a conversation. Now, the Wilmot situation is that farmers were approached to sell their land. And the controversy associated was that there was a lot of NDAs and not having those conversations at the provincial level. Um, so there's still an ongoing issue now. We do neighbor onto that riding a little bit. We're not necessarily impacted at this time, but
Okay.
that's not to say that it can't happen anywhere in Ontario. So the Ford government had eliminated quite a few under the guise of red tape, conservation type protection mandates.
Mm-hmm.
And in doing so, the situation that's happening in Vermont could happen anywhere.
Okay. The Ford government's been pretty quick to use. So
MCOs are the biggest topic as well,
NZOs.
especially in our area.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that and I mean throughout the green belt there's been a lot of controversy over the
Hmm.
same thing, and Highway 413 is still, and then they get even more insane with their ideas and building tunnels and having this road under that road, and
If the
it's
tunnel would make this conversation. I thought it was satire. I really did.
that's
Um, yeah.
so I
Oh,
mean out here though we're more concerned about the growth we've been having and farmland being taken up, and other we don't have a lot of other greenland, we parkland in a lot of areas of our riding, and there's like that's an issue. So what are you and Liberal Party, what are you planning to do to protect these lands?
well, even though the green belt necessarily isn't in Perth-Wellington, it still impacts us, and so does
Yeah.
Highway 413 and even the Ontario Science Center. We're paying for it,
Yeah.
regardless of whether it's in our area or not. You and I are both paying for it.
Hmm.
Um, so one of the things that, in addition to bringing those voices to the table, having our agricultural community and respecting the planning, I think that's another significant part is respecting the planning process. Like we need to have those voices at the table, and we need to protect what land we have. When they are eliminating the conservation bills, basically what it is that someone significant can say, I want to develop that land and I have this project and this is what I want to do. And we need to open it to the community. We need to be transparent and we need to have those conversations. But the secondary part with that, which really ties into, especially with the Ford government, is the Ontario Liberal Party, if elected and is the governing body. Our commitment to the people of Ontario is within 30 days. We will investigate every one of those controversial scandals and topics under the Ford government. Because I think a lot of it has been brushed under the rug. And we really need to figure out what happened, and we need to be accountable and transparent to the public. I think the Greenbelt has made another appearance based on, the eliminating of phone calls and emails and things of that nature in the last week. So we really do need to find out what happened as opposed to finding out bits and pieces every couple months. Like we really do need that investigative piece done.
And
Mhm.
then all of these relate to how we protect our environment, climate change, and with everything that's going on, things seem to be getting crazier every year with all the things we've talked about. It's hard to focus on issues like that that are really important, and they tie into everything we've talked about. How are you going to make sure that focus gets put on climate change in the environment, that things get done and it's talked about in conjunction with all the other topics?
We mentioned it before. There's no shortage of news, no shortage of things going on day to day. As interestingly as it is, I feel that it all interconnects under health. And I'm going to explain why. I think a lot of people think, oh, healthcare, but it does. I mean, we're looking at, our agricultural community that impacts our food, our livelihood, our economic status. We look at climate change that impacts how our agricultural communities are able to grow. It includes our stable and economy because I'm in a rural community. A lot of people are driving. We've got a lot of snow days right now. We've had significant catastrophic weather that's happened significantly in the last couple of years or so.
Mhm.
To me, it's all interconnected under health. It's all under the social detriments of health. And I feel like there's no one topic. Like it's not one thing to say, okay, I'm going to bat for healthcare. It's really going to bat for all of those topics, but they're all interconnected into our health and well-being. And kind of the theme as we've been discussing it is, our health and well-being. And if we get back to basics and what we need to survive and thrive and have our thriving communities, we can do so much more because we're focused on what actually matters, which is our riding, our people, and getting it right.
Yeah, and as soon as you said that, I was back in my classes that I've been taking recently where we're learning about not offering one method of treatment for a client. We're talking about the holistic view of their treatment and how we can match all these things together. And as soon as you said it was all relating to healthcare, I was like, yes, yes, it is. That makes
It
a lot
really
of sense.
does. It
Yeah.
really does. I mean, when I say healthcare, I think even having those conversations, healthcare comes up quite a bit at the doors. It really does.
Hmm.
And I think a lot of people immediately think of healthcare as wound care, bandages, going to the hospital, medications. But it's so much more than that. Like
Yeah.
in order to be healthy, you talked about mental health and addictions, but you know, access to food, access to stable employment. One of the things that I'm actually super excited about, but in the last week we didn't cover it, but I'd love to add it in as well, is doubling
Okay.
the ODSP. That particular
Wow.
population. How do we survive and thrive as as an organization, as an organization of people, as a population, if we don't look after our most vulnerable? And you're right, it's not going to be a one put everybody in a one box method, but we do need to look at all of Ontarians, and we need to get the basics back to what works for them.
And
Mhm.
I'm glad you brought that up because ODSP, Ontario Works, it's great that we offer them, but they're not practical with the cost of living.
Yep.
We're in an area that is second to Toronto for what the cost of living is, what the
Oh, like the living
living
wage?
wage would be.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that just goes to show how right you are on this topic, where all those things, because that living wage gets worked out by combining all the social determinants of health and looking at them and seeing what, and actually, it gets worked out at kind of the bare minimum
Mhm.
for having those covered. It's not even at a level where you're really able to survive and thrive. It's just pretty much this is what you'd need to survive. It,
Especially when we look at like living wage, you're right, it is calculated a little bit lower, especially when we look at what the range of rental accommodations are in our area, as well as what you can access. I mean, with a lack of transportation in some areas, you can only access what is in your community, and hopefully those businesses are able to support you. Like the PC Connect, for example, I know is losing their rural route funding. That will impact, where people are going in terms of their shopping for food or medications, things like that. It's tricky. It really does show, especially when we look back this week into some of the comments that were made by the Ford government. Someone sitting at home watching the Flintstones. First of all, I'm trying to figure out where the Flintstones are actually still on TV. Like that just shows how out of touch our premier is. But the secondary part is many people I know that are on ODSP work, or have some form of something that keeps them engaged and active in their community. And by making those comments, you're not encouraging people to, as you mentioned before, that mental health piece. We all need a purpose, no matter what it is. And I don't think those comments help with our society.
no. And then you mentioned something else I was going to go into next because I know a lot of people who got this opportunity to have public transportation out here. They use
Mm.
it and it's being taken from them. I know because I was reporting on it The Perth County Council was very reluctant to have PC Connect in the first place, at least a few members of it. And so when the funding didn't come through to continue it, I don't think certain members of that council were too upset. But I do know constituents who have been very affected. On the other, I'm not going to say the whole council was like that because I know some of them fought to try and keep it. But if you and the Liberal Party get in there, can we expect that something can be done to save that? I mean, it wasn't a perfect transportation system, but it was something, and I know people used it to get to medical appointments in Stratford from Listowel, and now they're stuck. Well, they will be at the end of March.
Yes.
They can still do it right now, but it's coming up, and it's going to really affect some people who use it for very important meetings like that.
Yeah,
So,
exactly. The Ontario Liberal Party platform, as I mentioned, was on OntarioLiberal.ca. It's going to be a little bit bigger, but obviously this is more of a significant local issue. And so part of my commitment is working with the municipalities. As you mentioned, there's going to be agreements or disagreements, but that's it's going to happen regardless of where you are, but it's bringing that voice to the table and having that conversation. And had a lot of conversation with a lot of our municipal councillors about even when we look at what's being funded and what's not, municipalities are feeling the pressure, right? There's a lot of crunch from the provincial government that has been downloaded onto municipalities to make it work. And then they can't prioritize what they need to do because they're paying essentially for the province at that point. And so the Ontario Liberal government has got a commitment that, the province should be paying for what's provincial jurisdiction, and should be actually working and accommodating under that level. So, we will be looking at that. Transportation is such a barrier and a challenge in rural communities, and a significant part of Wellington is rural. We do need to address, make it easier for our constituents to be able to access what they need. Medical appointments is definitely a priority, but I know there's other rationales of why the PC Connect is used. And I've heard lots of great feedback from people who are using it.
yeah, I think that's very important. And yeah, like I was saying, I think it was a good start and it could be improved. And I was looking forward to it becoming more, not less. And
Mhm. And what a
I,
great example too to use for other areas that are having similar, there's a significant amount of rural communities, and had that conversation with people of when I say rural communities, I know you know what it means, but there's people who often immediately go to the northern part of Ontario. But there's
yeah.
a significant amount of rural hamlets and townships around us that still need access to services and access to products and things of that nature. Mhm.
Yeah. And like for a certain segment of the population where we are, if you have to make it to Kitchener or like a city that's an hour away and you don't drive, and there's a lot of people who drive out here, but there's people who don't or who can't drive for medical reasons, but they still have appointments an hour away.
Mhm.
So when it's like that for you, you might as well be living up north in some ways. Like, I mean, you have it's not exactly the same as being in a fly-in community, but if you don't have access to a car and you have to get to this goes all the way back to when I was bringing up people who I know who have used substances. There it was services being offered in Waterloo, but these people don't drive. So, and you can't just move from one to the other very easily right now. You can't go, oh, those services are there. I'm gonna move there because housing
Yeah.
is a problem.
Or even
So
within that time frame of, okay, I can get a ride, but there's certain hours of operation. I mean,
yeah.
it's definitely been a topic. And then the other part of it related to that, we think of services in our rural communities. I mean, I've had a lot of conversations, particularly in our neck of the woods, in regards to, we've had a lot of cold days, December, January. I think we hit some record days there for at least a couple of days, at least a week.
Hmm.
And it's being able to access those services that work for our people locally because as you mentioned, you can't just drive to Guelph. You can't just get a ride to Guelph, which is part of Wellington County, which is primarily where I am in this area. So for one, like warming stations, Monday to Friday business hours. Okay, what do we do for the overnight? Okay, what do we do for weekends? I'm still in an area where many businesses are closed on Sundays. Now it's Monday to Saturday. Okay, what do we do for Sunday? So, it might not necessarily be provincial jurisdiction, but again, we need someone to have that conversation, and maybe you need that leadership where someone gets the group together, for lack of better wording, and we start to work on some of these issues that, again, we don't think about until we're either in that situation or we know someone who has.
Hmm. And Listowel we were very lucky. People came through. Our warming stations got opened overnight because people offered to be there for people. And
Amazing.
that's at all levels, from the municipal right on up. When you are offering services, people have more reason to feel part of the community, to be proud of where they live, and to feel a part of a whole community, like I said. And so all those things do come together from right from the municipal level right up to the federal level. If
Mhm.
you're seeing that people care about you, then you're going to be more apt to be involved and care back for your neighbors and stuff.
Absolutely. I mean, it's fantastic to hear of North Perth doing that. I know there's been a lot of conversations about Mount Forest, particularly with the overnights. They had been working on it. They've put a plan in place. But again, there's so many little hamlets and towns and townships in Perth Wellington. So if something's working successful in one area, we can replicate it in various different ways. It might not, like you said before, it might not be exactly the same, but what a great example that we can use to model in other areas to make it work.
Tell people who you are, how they can vote for you, and where they should be voting.
So my name is Ashley Fox. I am a registered practical nurse, and I am the Ontario Liberal candidate for Perth Wellington. Currently, election day is on February 27th, and there'll be more information coming on February 14th for polling locations for that. And you can vote today at the returning office or our local elections office on Erie Street in Stratford, or you can request a mail-in ballot. And now electionsontario.ca has their full information, and they'll be having more information on advanced polling for February 20th to the 22nd, as well as where those polls will be. Now, being mindful, keep an eye on Elections Ontario. I share this information all over my social media, which you can find me at Ashley Fox RPN across various platforms. But I share this information because we're in a unique situation where this is the first winter election in a little bit around 40 years. And so Elections Ontario is mindful that there may or may not be a snow day. That impacts a little bit of voting. And they're also well aware that there are people that cannot come out to vote. And if you are one of those people, please call Elections Ontario. They will arrange to either have it brought to you or have it arranged with the mail-in ballot that it gets directed to them by Elections Day. I think it's February 27th at 6 p.m.
Thank you. And it's been great talking to you. So,
My pleasure. A
all
lot of great
right.
conversations. Keep them coming.
Okay. Thank you.
This election has been very unique to me, where I've actually had conversations, support, and discussions across party lines. It's
Okay.
all partisan. It's been very interesting to me as an individual, but also as a candidate to see that coming forward. It's primarily it doesn't have to be edited in that sense, but primarily my reason to run, and you can find that information is posted on social as well, is the people of Perth Wellington across party lines reached out to me and wanted wanted to work on healthcare education and feel like they were actually not just being listened to, but actively heard and seeing
Okay.
action. And that's what led to it. It's an interesting
Nice.
time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then our first Rotary debate will be at the Rotary Complex in Stratford
Okay.
on the 20th. Yeah.
Okay. Um, wow, that's like 7 days before. That's
There's not a lot of
yeah,
time.
it's yeah.
And then Chet
When they
Mapleton,
said it was
that
a
Forrest
snap
Schaefer had reached out
election,
too, and I thought, wow.
yeah. When they said snap election, it really was. It was like announced, and then I'm looking at it going, wow, got to, I'm going to be voting in a couple weeks.
Yeah.
That's like,
Yeah, I voted at the returning office as soon as they said you can vote now. I personally did, and I've recruited a few people to make sure that they go and vote because I know things are going to get busy, right? You only have
so
so
who'd you
many
vote for?
weekends, and
That's
oh, at the time it was the only female on the ballot, but my understanding is there's another female candidate, so I'm very excited actually.
okay.
So there's a lot of confusion, I would say, across Ontarians, and then there's still a few Ontarians that I don't think actually know we're in a provincial election, despite having those
Yeah,
conversations. So
I've, so
the very first post I had posted on it of where you could go to, how you could vote, because that was the first thing that came through actually, is when I had completed my paperwork. The very first message I got from someone through social media was, "How do I vote?" And I think it was like 2 in the morning on the day that the writ had dropped. Like it was so pleasantly
oh,
surprised that someone was looking. But it was because they were going on vacation and they needed
okay,
to know like ASAP, right? They're going south. And I
okay,
said, okay, so I found that information and I made the post. And the first comment publicly from someone not following my page in regards to that of how to vote and where the information will be coming from was they thought it was the federal leadership, the federal Liberal
hmm,
leadership, and they asked about how it would impact them. But it was really truly about the Ontario provincial election for
yeah,
Perth-Wellington. So uh, I'm hoping that with enough people engaging in a couple of these events starting this week, maybe we can have those conversations. But we really need to
yeah,
get people engaged, especially when voter turnout is so low. Um,
hmm,
we expect that. I hate to say it, we expect that on a municipal level, but we don't on a provincial and federal. We need to get those votes in.
yeah,
Hmm.
yeah. So, okay, well,
Well, thank you so
uh,
much.
yeah, no problem. And I'll try and get this up as soon as possible.
Fuck the USA. Fuck the USA. Fuck the USA.
Thanks for listening, and thanks to Ashley for the interview. The song I ended the show with is Fuck the USA by the Greek band Chupakavlas. I probably butchered that pronunciation, and for that I apologize. Check the description for more information about how to find more music by them. Visit Wood-stein.ca, that's WOOD-STEIN.ca. You can support this podcast by becoming a patron at patreon.com/Colin Burrows. There are bonus videos and more available for people who support through Patreon. Like, share, comment, follow, and support Woodstein Media and this podcast, and have a wonderful day. And if you're in Ontario, get out and vote.